I just pressed the Let's Go Live button, so let's wait for the stream to fire up all across the fruited plain of the internet before we go ahead and get started. We've got some serious business to attend to, that is for sure. But before we dive in, let's make sure we're alive and well. It looks like we are, which is tremendous news. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gouveia. I am a criminal defense attorney broadcasting from the Valley of the Sun, deep in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. And today we're talking about attacks. We've got several trials we need to dig into. Of course, we are picking up with the Proud Boys trial. They were in closing arguments. We're on day 62. We heard from two defendants who had their closing arguments presented yesterday. We had Ethan Nordine and we had Zachary Real. So today we'll have Biggs, we'll have Enrique Tarrio, and we'll have Dominic Pizzola, the man who took the stand and delivered a whopper of a testimony. So we're going to go through all of that, day 62, and then the trial is handed off to the jurors. And so they are going to be deliberating for the rest of the week, which is going to be interesting. We'll see how quickly they turn around a verdict. We also have a brand new trial starting today. So as the Proud Boy trial comes to a close, Donald Trump, his civil trial, which is kind of a weird thing going on, he's being charged, or he's being sued, is the better way to say this, for an old criminal violation. Okay, so actually he's being sued for, well, we'll get into it. But you'll see here, civil trial started. They already picked out a jury. So we've got a civil jury that is seated. The case is E. Jean Carroll suing Donald Trump. Trial is underway. So they started with opening arguments. And it is interesting. Trump said he was going to be there. We have the full trial thread that we'll jump over to from our friends at Inner City Press. We have a couple docket updates. The judge has picked the jury. You can see the composition. We'll get into all of that and more. And so, my friends, there is just a lot to get to. And if you want to be a part of the show, the best place to do it is by joining us over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We have an amazing community. Whether you join on Locals or you join on YouTube, we very much appreciate you becoming a member. We do member-only streams, and we have a lot of fun. We also have a private Telegram group because the chats here at the close of the show, they come to an end. But the chat goes on and on, my friends, in our Telegram chat. And so come and join us at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We also have some serious trial coverage to get into, and we always have to be properly neutrified and fortified, courtesy of our friends over at Field of Greens, fieldofgreens.com, if you haven't been there. We all would like to lose some of those leftover pandemic pounds, but, you know, how sick are you of all the ads for weight loss pills and fad diets? You know, we've been there, we've done that, and they just don't work. But you know what does? Eating 5 healthy servings of fruits and vegetables every day. 5. You do that, the weight probably just falls right off. But vegetables, not a fan, and fruit, who's got time to prepare that every day? I don't. Let's talk about Field of Greens. Field of Greens is a science-backed formula, very specific fruits and vegetables you're not going to find in any other product. Proper nutrition reboots your metabolism so you can burn calories faster, lose weight a healthier way. And Field of Greens is the only brand backed by a better health promise. Yes, you'll look healthier and you're going to feel healthier fast. But the greater proof is going to come at your next checkup when your doctor says, wow, you've lost weight. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. All right, so let's get you started. Very easy, fieldofgreens.com. When you go there, there's all sorts of stuff beyond Field of Greens. They've got other stuff for weight and health. They've got other stuff for joints and movement, physical fitness, exercise, all sorts of very, very great stuff. Real organic superfood, fieldofgreens.com. And don't forget to use code Robert so you save 15% off when you check out. Code Robert and fieldofgreens.com. All right, my friends. And so let's get into the meat and potatoes because we've got a lot to get to. The civil trial against Donald Trump starts and the jury has been selected. Now, it's a civil trial. It's not a criminal trial. Like many of the other criminal trials we've been covering here, Trump just got indicted. We're going to see that there are probably other indictments coming here soon as June. But in this case, it's a civil case relating back to an old criminal allegation. And it is the R word. It's the word that we try not to say here on YouTube because they demonetize you and it turns into a big thing. But it's an R word, and it is alleged that in 1995, okay, many years ago, There was a department store assault. Donald Trump went in there. This woman, E. Jean Carroll, was somebody who was in the media, and they sort of recognized each other, and something went down in a department store changing room. And we'll take a look at what is happening, of course, today as the trial unfolds. But this case sat around mostly dormant until Donald Trump became a threat, and then people resurrected it. In my opinion, what happened was individuals were looking and surveying the country to see if they could find good litigants, good plaintiffs in which to bring claims. You know how you hear those commercials on the TV? Have you been injured in a mesothelioma? Or have you walked under a ladder somewhere and somebody dropped something on your head and you took this drug or something? They advertise that all over the country, and they're trying to identify plaintiffs who they can sue on behalf of, essentially. Do you have a claim? Give us a call. If you do, we're very good at these types of lawsuits. Same concept here. Certain people wanted to identify very specific plaintiffs who could go and engage in lawfare against Donald Trump to sideline him in the courts, to cause a never-ending waterfall of bad news coming his direction. And so they found somebody, this woman, E. Jean Carroll, who is not even hardly competent, in my opinion, based on what we have seen from her. She seems like she doesn't remember a lot of these details. She was calling it kind of an exciting adventure kind of a thing until it happened. A very weird ordeal. And her deposition was strange because in her deposition, she said that this lawsuit was not being funded by anybody, but we learned that it was, in fact, being funded by this guy, Reid Hoffman, a billionaire founder of LinkedIn, the same guy who has created all sorts of, at least 2 other organizations dedicated to stopping Republicans because he hated Donald Trump. And so he was the backer. We know that George Conway, another TDS Max extremist, was the person who met with E. Jean Carroll, convinced her to file her claim long after the fact. And Roberta Kaplan was the lawyer that he referenced. So they're just assembling a little litigation team, and a billionaire is funding the whole thing. And it's been going on for years now. And it all relates back to a 1995 allegation. We kind of think we know when the timeline is, but we'll get into it as the trial unfolds. So the whole thing has been another witch hunt, another lawfare that was instituted to go after Donald Trump. And the question is, what can we get into in trial? And previously here, we've covered some of the last minute filings when Alina Abba, Trump's lawyer, said that this disclosure was dishonest. In other words, E. Jean Carroll, during her deposition, didn't tell the truth. The truth was later discovered, and Reid Hoffman turned out to be the founder or the funder of all of this litigation. Very expensive. So Alina wants to talk about this stuff, as you can imagine, in trial. She wants to bring it to the judge's attention and say, Your Honor, the jurors should hear about this, and the jurors are just about to be seated, or they were seated today. But here, there was a motion by Trump's lawyers. They wanted to bring up this litigation and the funding of the litigation, because you can imagine if there's a highly partisan funder who is backing the litigation, maybe that makes the entire litigation a little bit biased. Maybe it's not about getting Miss Carroll compensation for an assault that may or may not have occurred. It's more about turning a grind, right? Having an axe to grind against the political opponent and using litigation to do that. You certainly want to be able to bring that up and say, who has been paying for this for all of these years? All of this legal work, all of this is done on contingency basis, but it still is expensive. Somebody's got to fund it. Lawyers don't work for free. So Alina and the Trump's team, they wanted to bring this up, but the judge is kind of holding it until further proceedings. He says, on April 20th, Miss Carroll moved in limine, so sort of to limit, to preclude. These are preliminary motions, but they're kind of to limit or to encourage, to allow something or to limit something. They're preliminary motions that take place before a trial to make sure that the trial moves forward in a particular manner without having to get into it in front of the jury. Let's resolve these issues, the preliminary issues now. So what happened here is E. Jean Carroll is suing Trump. Trump and his defense, they want to bring up evidence about this litigation funding. So E. Jean Carroll filed a motion in limine to stop Trump from offering any evidence or making an argument with respect to the funding. Now, this morning, Trump filed extensive papers in opposition, and the judge is saying, Ms. Carroll, you may wish to reply to this. So you said, don't talk about the funding. Trump says, we definitely have to talk about the funding. You may want to respond to the request to talk about the funding, and you should deliver that no later than April 26. So until that time, okay, April 26, which is tomorrow, and the trial just started, so we had opening arguments today. Until that time, as we get a ruling, neither party shall make any reference to litigation funding in the presence of the jurors. So we're going to hold that and come back to a conclusion on that later. But that is the quick makeup of the case, and so we'll see if they get into the funding at a later date. But let's talk about the jury now, because we do have a jury that has been impaneled. And NBC News had just a quick breakdown on the jury, and we can see here jury selection started late on Tuesday morning in federal court, just blocks from where Trump was arraigned this month with Alvin Bragg and Tishy Latish James. This month on criminal charges, Trump has pleaded not guilty to those charges. But today, the judge settled on a jury of 6 men and 3 women by early afternoon, which I think is a good thing for Trump. 6 men and 3 women. Much better than 6 women and 3 men in a case involving allegations of the R. I think that if you did a general cross-section of favorability ratings of Trump and anything closely related to Trump, I would guess that the men would be likely to be more favorable than the females, generally, as a general rule. Broad strokes here. But if I was representing Trump, I would be pretty happy with that number, just that number alone. 6 men and 3 women, great. I think maybe 6 men might have a little bit more doubt about what happened nearly 30 years ago and say, that's crazy, than maybe some other women would. And again, broad strokes on this. Not everybody falls into those categories, but we broadly categorize people in jury selection. That's just what you do. So although Trump was not present in the courtroom for jury selection, he was still a presence in the courtroom. When the judge presiding over the case, U.S. District Judge Lewis Kaplan, asked potential jurors, they said, is there anything, ladies and gentlemen, in this case about the nature of this case or the parties, Trump, that would make it difficult for you to give a just and impartial verdict? And 10 people, they just sprung out of their chairs. At least they're honest. 10 out of 48 stood. They just sprung right up. They're like, oh, yeah, I hate Trump. And the judge dismissed all of them. So they all got the boot out of there. So former president was there. Now, there was a videotape deposition. And of course, there is a lot to dig into about the particular trial. So let's do that. Actually, I wanted to share this with you. This was another order that came out. And there was this is kind of an interesting filing, you can see. Trump is in a unique position because he is just a regular defendant in this case, right? It's Donald Trump, but he's also a former president. And we also have some interesting arguments that you can make on behalf of a former president that maybe you can't make on behalf of a regular civilian defendant. And so we're always curious as to if they'll exercise those things. And there was a filing about depositions and objections. So the parties got together, right? Trump sat for a deposition and E. Jean Carroll sat for a deposition. And the question was, can certain parts of the deposition essentially, come in, or can they argue over these things, or, what they're just divvying up the depositions, and they are making objections as to whether those bits can be used. And so here you see there's a whole bunch of them. The judge is going to defer some of these objections till later times. They're going to preserve the objections for appeal, but the judge is going to overrule them. Just they say, hey, we're making these objections. They know they're going to get overruled. That one was sustained. And so the judge, a lot of this stuff is being hashed out right now, and it will come out in trial. I'm just sharing this with you so you see sort of the structure of how this works. The judge and the defense and the plaintiff, they'll submit lists, and then the judge will rule on them bit by bit. And we'll go through them, I'm sure, one by one as the trial proceeds. Of course, we may reference back to this if we need to, or we'll just see if the trial has it as it all unfolds. But that was the other filing I wanted to share with you. And now let's go in and see what actually happened at the trial. So it's now, the case is E. Jean Carroll versus Donald Trump, Southern District of New York. And we remember our friend Inner City Press at Inner City Press, who does great coverage there out of the Southern District of New York. And we were with Inner City Press for the GM trial, and he did a great job there reporting on behalf of that trial. And so they were there early this morning, and they were picking the jury, and we fast forward through jury selection, and they read out the names. The numbers are 10, 48, 44, and so on. And they get their lunch. So the lunch breaks. They're going to resume at 2:45. And we're back right after lunch. Judge Kaplan is back in the courtroom. And he tells Trump's lawyer, hey, we're not moving the lectern. All right. He starts to move the lectern around, and he says, all right, I'm not going to move it. I'm not going to move it. And the judge says, I somehow thought you'd see it my way. Don't you touch my lectern. So the jury enters, and Judge Kaplan starts to explain to the jury a little bit about how this trial is going to proceed. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been chosen for a very serious duty here today. I want you to know that you're going to hear a lot of evidence throughout the course of this trial, and a couple points I want to make clear. First, questions and objections that you hear by lawyers, they are not evidence. Just so you understand. And says Miss Carroll seeks to receive money damages in this claim. It's not a criminal trial. Says Mr. Trump has not been charged criminally for the conduct. She alleges battery. And we're not just talking about the little bunny that powers your radio, you know. We're also saying that battery is the unjustified touching of another person. Says even an unwanted peck on the cheek could be a battery. But here, Miss Carroll is alleging the R word. That's a form of battery. Now, you may have heard about this concept called statute of limitations. Last year, though, New York revived the ability to bring a suit for sexual misconduct. So they extended the statute of limitations by statute. They said, is there anything we can do to to go after Trump? Perfect. Let's pass this bill, and then we can bring up a new claim. So the judge told them that. So you guys don't need to worry about why this case is so old. You've already heard about the statute of limitations. It says, as jurors, just so you know, you're here, you cannot Google. You cannot tweet. I'm talking to you about BlackBerries. You just can't do that. If you become aware that another juror has done so, you have to let me know. You got to go through Andy, my bailiff, my court clerk here, and try not to form any opinion until the end of this trial. It says we're going to have opening statements now. And says to me, opening statements, ladies and gentlemen, are kind of like movie trailers. Sometimes they're an accurate advertisement of what's going to happen in the film, sometimes not. Clear? Jurors like, yeah, we understand. All right, who's up here first? Who's opening for the plaintiffs for E. Jean Carroll? And this person is called Crowley, lawyer for E. Jean Carroll. Miss Crowley. She says, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take you back to 1996. Whoa, that's a long time ago. Miss Carroll was leaving Bergdorf Goodman's. She ran into Trump, who she knew, and he asked her to help him choose a gift, some kind of lingerie. And they were in a dressing room, and when they went in there, Donald Trump pulled down her tights and assaulted her. And it was a horrendous ordeal. But Miss Carroll got away from that incident, from that attack. And she told two friends. Later, she swore them to secrecy. She said, don't you dare tell anybody about this, that I told you this. But eventually, her silence became impossible. In 2017, she began to write a book. She wanted to turn it into a memoir. And she included a chapter in there about Trump's assault. And Trump's response to the book, Trump was president, of course, back in 2017. His response was explosive. From the White House, he said, "She's not my type." We know what that means. She's too ugly to assault. He branded her a liar and a fraud. Now, I'm proud to represent Miss Carroll in this trial. This is a roadmap, and I'm going to share it with you, ladies and gentlemen. Donald Trump assaulted her in 1996. Then he defamed her. You're going to hear all about it. And Donald Trump responded with vicious lies meant to destroy her. You'll hear from others, ladies and gentlemen, and her friends. You'll hear from 2 Bergdorf employees and Miss Carroll's sister, the former boss at Elle magazine. Miss Carroll came from Indiana, and she sold her first piece of writing at age 36. She decided to move to New York. She wrote for Saturday Night Live in the mid-90s. She had an Ask E. Jean segment. Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear Miss Carroll testify here in this trial. She's going to tell you that she finished filming her TV show in Fort Lee, New Jersey, and then she went over to Bergdorf's. She headed to the exit on 58th Street just as Donald Trump was coming in. This was before he was even on The Apprentice. And Trump recognized her. She was a well-known writer at the time, and Trump said, "Hey, you're that advice lady." Miss Carroll said, "Hey, you're that real estate tycoon." She agreed to help Trump with a present. Now, he suggested lingerie on the 6th floor, but it was empty. Trump picked up a bodysuit and told Miss Carroll to try it on. And you may ask, why on earth would Miss Carroll let Donald Trump lead her into a dressing room? That's weird. She blamed herself for that. It's true. But at the time, she thought the random encounter was funny. She didn't see him as a threat. But she was wrong. When they got in there, Trump banged the door closed. He was a big man, had easily 100 pounds on her. He jammed his hands up and into her, and he forced his, inside of her. They say it lasted a few minutes, and she fled. You're going to hear from her, and she's going to describe it all. I expect you're going to listen to her and find her to be credible and convincing. Now, Miss Carroll's going to admit that she doesn't recall the day or the month. She thinks it was a Thursday. In the spring, she had no coat. And let me be clear, it does not rest solely on her testimony, this case. There's more here, not just Carroll. You'll hear from Bergdorf employees at the time. She ran out onto 5th Avenue. She pulled out her cell phone. Yeah, they had them in the 90s. And called her friend Miss Birnbach. She told Miss Birnbach about her tights being pulled down and about being penetrated, and she told Miss Birnbach, never speak of it again. And Miss Carroll told Miss Martin, who advised her to stay quiet, that Trump was too powerful. Miss Carroll was born in 1943. She was part of the Grin and Bear It generation. Her sister's going to tell you that. And we have another expert on that too, Dr. Leibowitz, who's going to come here. Miss Carroll was interviewing women about their experience with men. And at the time, the allegation arose against a famous Hollywood movie producer. It was time to share things that had happened to her. She made a list, but she held off on including Trump. Eventually, an excerpt was published in the New York Magazine. Trump said he never met her. He threatened that she will pay dearly. He said, she's not my type. Using the most powerful platform on earth, and many people believed him. And then in 2022 on Truth Social, Trump called Miss Carroll's story a con job and a hoax. She lost readers and she lost fans. And you're going to hear that Miss Carroll is not the only woman that he did this to. You're going to hear him on a hot mic. You're going to hear Trump saying, when you're a star, you can do anything. You can grab him by the, whoa. She says, this was not locker room talk. It's what he actually did. You'll hear from 2 other women that Trump assaulted. One on a plane in 1979. Trump also called her a liar. And you'll hear from a People magazine reporter who went on a Mar-a-Lago in 2005 who Trump pushed against the wall. In 2016, she shared her story and Trump insulted her. He said, go look at her. I don't think so. You're going to hear Trump lie in a deposition. He said he never bought gifts at Bergdorf. It's a lie. Trump has said, I never met her. That's a lie too. And so the question is about whether Donald Trump was lying in October. And at the end of the trial, we'll speak to you again. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Judge says we'll take a 10-minute break. And they're back. Now, Trump's lawyer is up, and this is Joe Tacopina, who we've covered here. He delivers opening arguments. He says, ladies and gentlemen, people have strong feelings about Donald Trump, one way or another. And it's okay to feel however you feel. That's okay. You can hate Donald Trump. It's okay. You can express that at a ballot box, but not here in a court of law. He says, well, no one is above the law. No one is beneath the law either. Politicians don't make this country great. Jurors do. And Trump's sitting here. He's like, well, my whole slogan is make America great again. What? What are you doing? If you follow the facts, justice will be served. What is paramount is the rule of law, ladies and gentlemen. And what E. Jean Carroll is doing here today in this courtroom is an affront to justice. She is exploiting actual, true victims for money. You cannot let her profit off of her abuse of this process. This case must be decided on the evidence. And let's look at her story. In some unknown season, she said 1995 or 96, she said that she was violently attacked in a dressing room in a Bergdorf's. She would have you believe that Donald Trump was going to try on lingerie over his pantsuits. These other two never made a claim. E. Jean Carroll's story is unbelievable. The other people that the government's going to parade, they didn't bring a claim either. Says E. Jean's story is so unbelievable, they use a foolish statement 20 years ago, locker room talk. The same clip that was paraded all over the media. It's not an admission, they say. They put up tweets, a 25-year-old quote. Tweets from someone who may or may not have even been a Trump supporter. They say that Bergdorf witnesses are going to confirm every detail of this assault. They said that. You mark those words. They said that. What are they going to confirm? That they went to a lingerie department? Ladies and gentlemen, just buckle in. You're going to be here for a wild ride and listen to their story. The opening statement is supposed to be a promise, not a politician's promise. But let's talk about the lack of details they're presenting you here today. E. Jean Carroll can't even tell you the date, not the month, not the season, not even the year this happened. She doesn't want to give Donald Trump the opportunity to provide an alibi. There's no date. We can't refute anything. Instead, she says that she was AR'd on some unknown day, 27 or 28 years ago. 8 or 9 years before that, they were at a gala. Trump was with John Johnson, Channel 11. E. Jean Carroll says they took escalators up to the 6th person, but she didn't see a single other person, not a soul. It was like The Walking Dead up there. She says Donald Trump picked up a piece of lingerie. The dressing room are usually locked, but not now, though. She says that Donald Trump lunged at her, that the noise was so loud that anyone on the floor would have heard it. And how did she react? She laughed, she says. Her story continues that Trump attacked her for up to 3 minutes. She's on high heels and she pushed him off. And she somehow held onto her purse. She never screamed. She rode the escalator down, saw no one, walked out of the store, and can produce no objective evidence of any of this. No record of injuries, no doctor, no therapist, no video preserved. What you've heard here, ladies and gentlemen, is a fabulous story about what a fabulous writer she was. But there's nothing in her diary. There's no police report. She was an advice columnist who told her readers to report men to the police. She once called the police on teenagers who vandalized her mailbox. But she didn't write anything about this one down. We're going to learn that she says that she kept the dress for 25 years. She says she only realized that she was attacked until her friend told her about it. They were not, in fact, best friends. She would not have told either one of them. These are people who desire to be in the spotlight, these witnesses. All three of these people loathe Donald Trump politically. They schemed to turn Donald Trump and to turn on Donald Trump politically. Schemed. Martin emailed Carroll and said, "This has to stop," referring to Donald Trump. Carroll replies, "Yes. How can I help?" E. Jean Carroll came up with all of this, ladies and gentlemen, to sell a book. Why? To hurt Trump, to inject herself into the spotlight. Her life has never been better. She says she's been fabulous. She's making money. She's appearing on TV, all after the revelation of this very painful attack. She went on CNN and talked to Anderson Cooper. You'll see her basking in the spotlight. She became a celebrity and loved every minute of it. The story became the center of her life and her lifestyle. She called him an attacker. Of course he exploded. Evidence is going to show that E. Jean Carroll is, in fact, lying. While at a party, she met an attorney who we talked about called George Conway, a very big critic of Donald Trump, who spoke to her about suing. Objection. And the judge sustains it. Jury disregard that. This is where they're getting into the funding and seeking advice of counsel. A lot of that stuff is typically off limits. You'll hear that if Donald Trump is faced with so many lawsuits, that he's not going to be able to run for president. But the stories don't match up. Him calling her a liar is the truth. She suffered no harm. To the contrary. In fact, our defense will come up with their own witnesses. It says our defense will come from their witnesses. Their witnesses. That's our entire defense. We have some sworn testimony from Donald Trump that you're going to see in his own oath video deposition, and says, I don't want to detract from the focus of her story. He says some snarly things. That's understandable. But ladies and gentlemen, you have to decide if you believe the story or not. At the end, decide on the evidence, not the politics. If you do, Miss Carroll will not be able to deceive you. She gives a walking tour, the most hideous men in New York talking tour, to sell her book. She stops in front of Trump Tower. She smiles from ear to ear. Thank you for indulging. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all for me now. The judge says, okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much here of the jury. You're done for the day. We'll come back tomorrow with our first witness. You are excused. So the jury leaves, and the judge asks Trump's lawyer, says, Mr. Tacopina, so your client's not going to testify in person? He says, gosh, I don't know. I don't know. And he says, yeah, you can look at me that way, Judge. Sorry, I don't know. So Tacopina is keeping this open, right? He wants this possibility of Trump coming in here and causing a bunch of chaos to remain open as long as possible. Because you don't know. Maybe you do want Donald Trump to come in here personally. Kind of depends what happens here. So the judge wants to get him on the record now. So he's not going to come here in person, right? Like that's going to save us a lot of headache. Lawyer says, well, I don't know. Maybe he will, maybe not. Maybe it depends on how you rule on some issues, Judge. The transcript says, dodge Trump. You cannot leave it hanging. The time has to come. You have to tell me this week. He says, obviously, this is an imposition on court staff and security. He says, that's not my intention, Judge. I don't have my phone with me. He said, you got your George Conway story in. This judge, we've covered this judge before here on this channel. This judge is going to be probably a hoot. So Judge Kaplan, you got your George Story Conway in. Punk. Get out of here. All right. So that was it. That is day one, my friends, of the Trump trial. And let me know in the comments if you want us to stay covering this one or jump to other cases, because it's going to warm up. It is a civil trial. It is going to be spicy, but it's probably also going to be ridiculous because it is a ridiculous witch hunt case. So let me know if you want us to stay covering this down in the comments below. But of course, that was day one. Regardless of what happens, this is going to be part of a big onslaught against Donald Trump, and we're going to continue to cover all of it and more, including this new development. New indictment probably coming against Donald Trump in July. Charges are being contemplated. Let me take a quick look at this. Is this the date? Yes, this is the date. Fani Willis from Georgia. We've long covered her, speculating she's going to deliver a second set of indictments against Donald Trump. She is basically sending a save the date in the mail, saying it's going to be coming sometime in July. Here is what it looked like. From Fani Willis's office out of the county district attorney's office in Atlanta, Fannie Willis, the fanniest of all the Fannies there in Georgia, sent a letter over to the sheriff of Fulton, Patrick Labatt. Hand delivered on April 24th. Fannie says, "Hey, sheriff, my staff and I greatly appreciate the efforts that you have made to increase security at Fulton County Courthouse. While these efforts have addressed security needs related to several high-profile trials, the need for vigilance will increase." Why? Why do we need more vigilance? Is something going to be happening in July? Like what? A second indictment of Trump? She says, "In the near future, I will announce charging decisions resulting from the investigation that my office has been conducting into possible criminal interference in the administration of the thing. I am providing this letter to bring your attention to the need for heightened security and preparedness." Uh-oh. It's going to be bigger than other high-profile trials? She says, "Open source intelligence," I guess probably means Twitter, has indicated that the announcement of decisions in this case may provoke significant public reaction. We have seen in recent years that some may go outside of public expressions of opinion that are protected by the First Amendment to engage in acts of violence that will endanger our community. As leaders, it is incumbent upon us to prepare. She tells us, "I will be announcing the charging decisions resulting from our investigation, which will begin on July 11th and conclude in September. Please accept this correspondence as notice, Sheriff, to allow you sufficient time to prepare the Sheriff's Office and local and federal agencies to ensure that our law enforcement community is ready to protect the public. As your strategic planning process begins, collaboration with my investigative leadership team is vital. My team will be in touch in the coming days to set up appropriate conversations. My staff and I are grateful for the Sheriff's Office. We look forward to working with you. Sincerely, Fannie Willis." So increasing security. Wonder why that might be. Is it because they're not going to prosecute Donald Trump and everybody's going to be outraged? There'll be riots and protests there in Georgia. Prosecute him. How dare you decline? Or will it be a much more serious prosecution, with much more serious charges and allegations? Alvin Bragg's allegation is a basic level, low-level felony that is a convoluted charge. What happens if she comes with much more serious charges and she demands no bond, no bail? She wants to hold him in custody with more serious charges and delivers an indictment that indicts half the administration under RICO, racketeering. Is that what she might be concerned about? We don't know. We do know the foreperson of this grand jury was a little bit out there, Miss Coors, who is very excited to be the leader of this grand jury proceeding. So warning the sheriff, beef up your security, because Trump is probably getting indicted again for the second time. And that will be before the third and maybe even the fourth time, which the federal government is working on right now. So that is the update. Donald Trump, of course, is continuing on. The war against him continues, and it's just heating up. There's going to be a long way to go. These people are petrified that he is going to run again and potentially win. Their Biden announcement today, we talked about this on our member-only stream this morning. Biden announced he's running again. His announcement video was only like 2 seconds of him, maybe. All the rest of it was B-roll footage and voiceover. So how is he going to limp his way through the election if Donald Trump can just maintain even just normalcy and competency? He should be able to walk right in there. We'll see. They're petrified. They're going to try to indict him at least 3 more times if I had to guess. The next one's coming in July. So that, my friends, is the Trump update. Now let's turn our attention to the second half of closing arguments in the Proud Boys trial, because this one is coming to a close. And as usual, we're checking in with Roger Parloff, who's over at Roger Parloff on Twitter, at rparloff on Twitter. And he brings us to the start of the trial. He says, it's day 62 of the Proud Boys trial. The second half of closing arguments are going to be delivered for the 3 remaining defendants, and then the government comes with their rebuttal close. The day starts with Judge Kelly on the bench. All rise. Please be seated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start off with a sidebar. And the defense attorney called Stephen Metcalf says, Your Honor, we have a jury instruction on self-defense. He said yesterday self-defense was not mentioned during the government closing, and if I don't raise it, my position is that they can't use rebuttal evidence to disclose any of this stuff, so I'm asking for parameters. Metcalf is going to be delivering a closing argument, or his side is soon. The judge says, well, the evidence is what it is. It doesn't matter that they didn't argue it or anything. And they're talking about the scope of the arguments. So then we fast forward, and the judge said, I'll see it. Let's bring in the jury. We'll get there when we get there. So the jury is now in the courtroom. And Nayeeb Hassan delivers the closing argument for Enrique Tarrio. You may know him as the leader of the Proud Boys. He is in a lot of the imagery and a lot of the photos that we've seen. Now, apparently, there's a slide on the screen. The jury is looking at the screen. The slide says it's from FDR. We must scrupulously guard civil rights and liberties of all our citizens, whatever their background. We must remember that any oppression, any injustice, and hatred is a wedge designed to attack our civilization. FDR quote. Good FDR quote from a gigantic liberal, which will be perfect for this jury. I like it. Says, in early January, my colleague Sabino Jaraguay made an opening statement. You know, this was a long time ago. I know you've been here for a long time. In January, you heard our opening. We told you back then that our client, ladies and gentlemen, our client Enrique Tarrio was being used as a scapegoat. And my colleague highlighted many issues. He was bringing up the FBI. He was bringing up the Secret Service, the Metro PD, the Capitol Police, the Park Police, and most importantly, Donald Trump. You heard from Donald Trump. The infamous words at 12:17. We fight like hell. And if we don't fight like hell, we're going to lose our country. And then 36 minutes later, the first breach occurred. There's a crowd of more than tens of thousands listening to Trump's speech, saying walk from the monument to the Capitol. He says it was his anger and his words, Trump's, that caused what happened in January 6th to happen in your beautiful city, making Trump the scapegoat. Not Enrique Tarrio. He's not responsible for this. They want to use him as a scapegoat for Trump and those in power. They want to use you just like they're using Enrique. Enrique was not even there on January 6th, ladies and gentlemen. He did not create a plan to go into the Capitol. He never communicated any objective. And even in these encrypted chats, nobody was communicating about a plan or any objective. There was no understanding. There were no statements regarding stopping the transfer of power. You never heard any of that, either with force or without force. Enrique Tarrio did not march on January 6th. He did not meet near Washington Monument. He did not use a megaphone. He did not meet at the food trucks. He did not cross any barricade and never even entered the Capitol. No, Enrique was in Baltimore. He was arrested on January 4th. He burned a banner, and he was not charged with that here today. He was told to leave Washington by the state court. On January 5th, he obeyed the law and left Washington, D.C. And the government makes a point. They told you in their closings. He said, quote, make it a spectacle. He was talking about being taken into custody, okay, not for January 6th. He was talking about his arrest. He was released from county jail. He picked up by many individuals. And he was even picked up by a confidential human source, Kenny Lizardo, one of the government's own informants. No, ladies and gentlemen, there was no plan, okay? There was no objective. There was no understanding of an objective. There were 8 confidential human sources present on January 6th. There was no plan, there was no objective, and there was no understanding of an objective. Otherwise, they would have heard about it. So Tarrio left, and he had to turn down a previous engagement for Bianca Gracia of Latinos for Trump. They play a video. He says Tarrio never attacked any officers. He never broke a window. They want you to believe in discussing all these counts that it was a consequence, a foreseeable consequence of the conspiracy. They want him to be held responsible from a hotel room in Baltimore. They put a picture of Nostradamus up on the screen. He says, I guess he was kind of like Nostradamus because he could foresee everything that was going to happen that day. Allegedly use men and women as tools from hotel in Baltimore to stop certification of election by any means necessary. They want you to believe that his plan was to create a chat. They want you to set aside the reality that Antifa exists. They are in your community, ladies and gentlemen. They are here. They want you to forget about the fact that Bertino was stabbed. He was in the hospital over a week, and Tarrio had to do something. They've supported law enforcement. And they back the blue, saying the African-American female ended up in a hospital in November. That's what caused the chat to be created. And he says, I want to take you back to the debate. Remember, back in 2020 in September, Trump was up on the debate stage and he told, and I think they're going to use this, if there are convictions in this case, they're going to use this to prosecute Trump for seditious conspiracy at a federal level. At the debate, stand back and stand by. Remember when he said that, ladies and gentlemen? That was a nationally publicized statement. And those who support Donald Trump, they wanted to join the Proud Boys. Membership grew. Vetting became difficult. In November, Tarrio got on Parler saying, we're growing too fast. We can't vet. Things are getting out of control. So Tarrio wanted to create a buffer zone. It was Bertino who wanted to create the ruckus. He said, the government was here and they're trying to discredit Lamond. Enrique Tarrio was talking with police here around this time, especially Lieutenant Shane Lamond. He was getting info on the Proud Boys and giving it up to his superiors, and Lamond could not provide useful info to the government, so the government attacked Lamond. Metro PD Shane Lamond communicated with the DOD, Dave Engel, the Metro PD, Jeffrey Carroll, Guillermo Rivera, Carolyn Montega, Robert Glover, and VA State Police. He says, I think there's a whole list of the people that Shane talked to. I think there's 47 of them. Lamond with Assistant Chief Carroll. Lamond talked to Metro. Lamond asked Tarrio about the direction of the march and the plans. He said, my source about January 6th is extremely small and not in colors. Now, this was the same info that they used to arrest him. He says, this is all detrimental to the government's case because essentially Enrique is communicating with the police, telling them everything. And the police don't make any mention of the fact that there is a seditious conspiracy underway. Now, that is detrimental to the government's case. He communicated with law enforcement before he even came to D.C. on every single occasion. If you're coming to breach the barriers, would you tell law enforcement you're coming to D.C.? Would you tell them when you're coming and where you're coming, what hotel you're coming to, and what you're wearing? Of course not, especially if you're going to insurrect America. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, did Enrique Tarrio's Parler post seem over the top? Yeah, absolutely. But that's what this is about. We have the First Amendment in this country. You can say things that wouldn't be allowed. You may not like it, but it is the First Amendment. He said silent Big D ninjas are roaming the streets, which is funny. He said they could openly be speaking about their politics. They said he was just kind of an internet troll. Saying, I'm not denouncing this, denounce this D is what they're saying, denounce this D, baby, and you go, okay, these are not insurrectionists. These are bros out there who are just, goofing around in these chats with each other. They say, look, my client Enrique was an entertainer, all right, a lover, a razzle dazzler. They want you to believe that he manipulated these men to stop the transfer of power, but that is ludicrous. The government wants to use you. Don't let him. He tells them about reasonable doubt. If after some careful, impartial consideration, you cannot say that you're firmly convinced of this, then you have reasonable doubt. And if you have any preconceived notions about the Proud Boys here, ladies and gentlemen, you have to set that aside. The Proud Boys organization is not on trial here. My client is one of a few individuals on trial. Your deliberations the next few days will impact the rest of his life. Your verdict must be unanimous as to every single count. If you have a biting position that the government does not prove its case, it's your obligation to speak up in that room and to hold firm. You all come from different walks of life, and he names the names of what they do. No matter what we do for a living, you must hold the government to obligation to prove its case beyond any reasonable doubt. And there probably are some government employees on the list. Consider the demeanor of the witnesses on the stand, he tells them. Remember Bertino and remember Green. Whether they had any reason to not tell the truth, whether they had plea deals or benefits, or they didn't get charged with the things the government was threatening them with. Whether there were inconsistencies or consistencies in their testimony. Consider whether Bertino lied about being in possession of a firearm. Were any of these witnesses motivated by bias or prejudice? If so, you, ladies and gentlemen, can give it zero value. If you think he's a liar, you can give it zero weight. You also heard from Inspector Lloyd, who came here and testified. He told you there were issues internally. He says, yeah, we could have done a better job. He said he never communicated with the Chief of Intelligence, Jack. He never communicated with Lieutenant Shane Lamond. In fact, he said he had no intelligence whatsoever. We know it takes 30 minutes to walk from the Washington Monument to the Capitol. Let me correct that, 36 minutes. But another officer made a stop of Tarrio and ordered Tarrio to leave. And guess what? He followed the order. You heard him say that. Enrique is on video. He says, I have to leave. I can't be here. And my client obeyed the law. You also heard from a Secret Service agent called Linnell. Remember how evasive she was at times? Remember that I asked her how long to walk from the Washington Monument to the Capitol? And she said 30 minutes. But Nick Kested followed him from jail to the hotel, and he didn't hear anything about a plan. There were no communications with Enrique that led anyone to believe that there was any agreement or understanding. Now, I want to turn over to other people you heard from. People like Matt Green and Jeremy Bertino. They have everything to gain from lying to you, ladies and gentlemen. Both of them were caught red-handed with firearms in their possession. Both were convicted felons. You cannot possess firearms, objection sustained. And both men had to resolve those cases. And they never met Enrique. They never even talked with him. So the government wants you to believe that Enrique Tarrio telepathically, through his brainwaves, told them that it was okay to engage in violence because there's no text about that. That's like blaming video games for violence in the real world. Do we blame our wrongdoing on things we see on YouTube? I hope not. Yikes. That's what the government's doing here. This man was not charged with seditious conspiracy. He was released from jail early and will receive the benefit of his testimony, talking about the people who testified here. Jeremy Bertino lied to the government on multiple occasions, and the government turned a blind eye. These agents lied to Bertino. FBI agent Nicole Miller, who was here today, lied to him. And they did nothing to correct Miller's lie. And he lied to you. He was teaching a young boy to hold an assault rifle, and he told you he didn't possess it. He lied in June. He lied again in June. He lied to you at the January 6th Select Committee. And then he came in here and he continued to lie to you, ladies and gentlemen. Then there was this line of questioning. Were you aware of the plan? No. How about an objective? No. What is that? He says. An unknown objective? That right there is reasonable doubt. This government wants to blame Enrique for things that they cannot prove. They want to use him as a scapegoat for people they can't target or who are too hard to target. I want to refer you to the judge's jury instructions that you're going to be reading when you go back there. It says the testimony of witnesses who have entered plea agreements should be used with caution. He says give them zero credit if they took a plea here. Don't trust them. You heard from Kate Kane, the FBI digital examiner. She only testified one time as an expert, and she didn't do a single extraction herself. Objection sustained. She was not aware who conducted the extractions. She was not aware of how they were handled. She didn't know that the version of Cellbrite that they used was an older version, and there were many revisions after the software. But nevertheless, the government created huge volumes of exhibits. This is faulty. Enrique, my client, never posted to the Boots on the Ground chat, never tried to include him in their charts. But they still tried to include him in their charts. They put his face all over the chats, even the ones he didn't communicate on. They're trying to mislead you. They're trying to use you just like they're using Enrique. We also heard from Peter Dubrowski, an FBI agent. There were errors and omissions in the exhibits. Only when shown the errors did he finally admit to them. And he also admitted that there is no proof at all that Enrique Tarrio opened the 1776 return document. He's not an expert of any sort, no training in Cellbrite. He told you he looked at more than 500,000 messages, but there's no evidence, not a single one, of Enrique Tarrio calling for violence. Instead, ladies and gentlemen, my client Enrique would lead the Proud Boys away from violence. He told you Enrique is more interested in women than fighting Antifa. Some Proud Boys held that against him, in fact, and now they're playing a chat. In the Zoom call, he says, we're never going to be the ones to cross a police barrier. He just said that. But the government wants you to believe that Tarrio instructed people to go over the barriers? We heard from Dubrowski that Tarrio was supposed to speak at Latinos for Trump at one of the special appearances, supposed to be there at 10 a.m. At no point ever did anybody talk about going into the U.S. Capitol. That's what Bertino wanted, who took a plea deal here, not Enrique. A fairly new FBI agent also came in and testified. Her name was Agent Kate. She had only worked on one or two conspiracies before on this one. Parlor posts we saw were deficient, lacked info. They were out of order. They kept bouncing back and forth in dates. The note she took was to show that she was on a mission, to show that they were connected together. She also wanted to show that there was animus towards the police. That was her mission. That's what she was told to do. She coined the phrase, there was a culture of violence. She created that. But the Parlor post failed to show that my client, Enrique, encouraged the violence at all. There's no evidence of dislike or any disrespect for the police. In fact, quite the opposite. Every one of these issues just compounds one by one. And then they put Agent Nicole Miller up here, the FBI agent. In fact, she was still on probation when she was assigned to this case. Relatively new. And she considered herself equal to Agent Hanek, who was sitting here throughout the trial. But she couldn't tell us how many confidential human sources had info on the Proud Boys. And only she testified that Tarrio opened the document. She said that to protect herself for her lie to Bertino. She had no forensic evidence at all. And Kate Kane, the expert, told you no evidence that he did. The one call that the government alleges took place between Enrique and Biggs, it lasted 42 minutes. She admitted there was no proof that the phone call was even connected. You heard more than 5 Proud Boys state the obvious. There was no agreement. There was no objective. There was no understanding of an objective. These individuals had everything to lose by coming in and telling you that. They were Proud Boys. They were concerned about being doxxed. They were concerned about being charged. There was no reason to lie about any of it. And Eddie Block is in the chat, who was there with his real good boy Donnie. He says, I'm not going to belabor the instructions on the offenses. When you go back there, you're going to be giving all of these evidentiary pieces like a puzzle. But I want you to think about this. There are pieces missing. There are 9 separate puzzles. 9 counts against my client, Enrique Tarrio. And if the puzzle is incomplete, we talk about him here as checkboxes, you must render the verdict of not guilty. It was the government itself, Mulrow, the prosecutor, said they don't know when the conspiracy even started. Was it in December? Was it on January 6th? There was never an objective. There was never an understanding of an objective, even on January 6th. Says, I give Mulrow a lot of credit over there at the prosecutor's table. He told you about the heroes of brave soldiers who stood on the line. Now, I submit you have the power to do what the law requires. Do what justice requires, what the Constitution requires, and stand up to the government and say, you haven't proven your case. And I must do my obligation as a juror today. And I want to end with a slide of Martin Luther King Jr. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Great quote. One of the great justice quotes. He says, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all of us indirectly. Hassan says, thank you. Now they take a break. And Roger fills us in with a little bit of a break. Prosecutors are chatting. Prosecutor's wife's there. Oh my gosh. A large group of prosecutors and agents chatting around the government table right now, including government prosecutor Kathleen Rakosi, co-lead prosecutor in the Oath Keepers cases, who is Prosecutor Knierson's wife. Oh gosh, get a room. Are you serious? These government prosecutors are both sedition prosecutors who are married. Oh my gosh, what a household that is. Could you even imagine? What a disaster. 2 prosecutors, both of them waking up. Wives prosecuting the Oath Keepers. Husbands prosecuting the Proud Boys. Could you imagine what their dinner table conversations are like? Oh gosh. So they're chatting away. You're doing a great job, honey. Yeah, you did a great job in your saving America from your seditionists. I wonder if they're thinking which one has the harder cases. Oh, gosh. Anyways, that's the DOJ for you. So Judge Kelly is back. He says, Mr. Metcalf, do you have any authority for what we talked about here? I says, no, I don't actually have that authority, but I am prepared to go forward. Stephen Metcalf delivers the defendant Dominic Pizzola's closing. And let's refresh our beverages, my friends. Cheers. Cheers, my friends, before we get into the second closing. Cheers, everybody. Good stuff. Oh, yeah. Good stuff. We're rehydrated now, which means we can get into it because we have a whole second set of closings. No, that wasn't Field of Greens. That's the morning routine. Field of Greens, you know, it's just water. If you drink stuff, then your mouth gets filled with other, you know, like sugary stuff. You got to just limit it to water. Field of Greens is in the morning. Let's get into it. Dominic Pizzola's attorney, Stephen Metcalf, stands up to deliver closing arguments. He says, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I have a warning for you. This is our last opportunity to argue, and I want to discuss reasonable inferences that you guys could make. You get to decide facts. You get to determine what the facts are, and you get to decide what's credible and what isn't. And this is quite empowering. You're empowered to make sure the legal system works. You're empowered to do justice. That's all I ask you to do. Now, I can only imagine how much you want to get on with this. Everything is going to shift to you. That's what matters now. And I'd like to compliment the government prosecutor on their closing yesterday, even though I don't agree with anything he said. But I want you guys to think about, real quick, even when you were younger, if you were ever falsely accused of anything, put yourself in this shoe. Now, I'm not saying Pizzola needs to be found guilty on every single count. It's his actions I want you to hold him responsible for. It's this fairy tale. He makes the sound of a crazy bird. What? It's this fairy tale that there was some conspiracy here. And I want you to think about how Pizzola has had to maintain his dignity for years while being charged with seditious conspiracy. To overthrow the government with 4 guys he barely knew? He's got no experience with the criminal justice system. Now suddenly he's in a federal courthouse in DC trying to overthrow the government? That doesn't make much sense. A government that he served. He's actually, okay, so he's putting this in, he's speaking in yous, right? He's saying, look, I want you to think about being in this position. You having no experience with the criminal justice system at all. And then suddenly you showing up in a courtroom being charged with conspiracy to overthrow a government that you served as a Marine. When I listened to Mr. Mulroe's closing argument, I thought of 3 words: speculation, politics, and cynical. And I looked up those words in the dictionary. He says, coming to conclusion based on insufficient evidence. That's the definition for speculation. And how do you possibly link all the evidence that you've seen here? How do you bridge the gap to get to conspiracy? Politics. My first request of each of you is to put your politics aside. If you can do that, then you'll be able to do justice. This case has mostly been about the government using Pizzola's politics so that each of you hate him. Even if you hate him or me, I just ask you to put that aside. There's a dangerous combination in those first 2 words: speculation and politics. And cynical. Cynical means believing people are purely motivated by self-interest, being distrustful of human sincerity. He says, you have no idea how much time I spend telling clients to just shut up. Mr. Pizzola wanted to tell you I trespassed. I broke a window. I got a shield. But seditious conspiracy? So in holding the government to the burden, I also ask you to not let them overinflate things. Why is Dom, my client, sitting at the table here? If you take Dom out of this equation, what have you got? Tario wasn't even there that day. Real, this highly educated guy, he's standing there. He's got a little role. You've got Rufio and Biggs. What did they need Dom for? Well, they needed dirt on these guys. They needed to muddy them up, and Dominic showed anger. He showed being pissed off, which they equivalated with violence. That's what he's here for. He's muddying up these 4. They added the conspiracy charge onto Dom. That's the only way they could muddy them all up. But were there any agreements with anybody? Was there a plot that nobody knew about that came from Tario? No, there was one objective here: a march and a rally. In December, that was Pizzola's first rally. He was excited. He was able to stand up and defend people who couldn't defend themselves. That was the objective, to meet and rally. Dominic told you he didn't even recognize these guys and didn't even meet them until he sat in this courtroom. He knew Biggs from online. He recognized Nordine, never spoke to him. He knew who Tario was because he was the chairman. People held him in celebrity status, but did he actually know Tario? Was there any communication with Tario? Instead, you have cherry-picked scenarios here. They find a picture where Dom is standing next to Tario. He's got pictures of himself from high school standing next to Muhammad Ali. Does that mean he had enough time to engage in a conspiracy with Muhammad Ali? Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee? No. Zach Reel testified as well here today. He said that he didn't even know who Pizzola was. Nobody knew him. Think about the timeline. When did Pizzola join this conspiracy? The government doesn't want you to worry about a timeline. So as long as it happened before January 6th, they don't want you to worry about a plan. I want you to think about those chats. You see this line that divides the leadership and the members? You're not going to see Pizzola on any of the leadership chats. He goes to this one. Dom's not in this one. He's in here, but he joined on January 2nd. He's in this one. He joined on January 4th. This one was only created on the 5th. That's it. And 90% of their case had to do with these communications. They had parlor messages and text messages. That's it. The FBI guy, Dubrowski, looked through 500,000 messages at least. 500,000, and cherry-picked the ones that bring out the dirt on these guys. They were playing Where's Waldo for a long time at the FBI with their crayons and coloring books, trying to single out grandmas who made their way into the Capitol building. But once they identified most of them and circled them, then they had to go through text messages. So Dubrowski, probably FBI special agent, whatever, sat through 500,000 messages, searching for a needle in a haystack, going to find the worst. And they prosecuted it on that basis, right? Most of this trial is exactly what he says here, messages. They needed dirt and dirty them up more by throwing Dominic into the equation. One chat they have. Hey guys, I don't have a hotel room. Tario responded. That's it. One message between all of them. On January 4th, Tario got arrested. Everything's chaotic. There was no plan. The government says don't worry about that, about the plan. Just think about the overall agreement. Now, I want you to remember, ladies and gentlemen, don't speculate. Pizzola was part of a local chapter. He was completely separate from the national chapters. Each chapter is supposed to be autonomous. On January 6th, there was still no plan. Still no plan on January 6th at 10 a.m. Mulrow said somebody gave crap about a Trump speech. That's not quite accurate. Dominic did want to see, said nobody gave a crap about Trump's speech. But that's not right. Dominic did want to see it. He left the group. He walked away for an hour and a half. Then he comes back. Then they blend in. When was it? 12:54, 12:55? That's when he got to the first barricades. You see him actually running past Biggs and Nordine, faster than a walk, but slower than a run. There was no time for him to say stop and say, hey, we got a plan? They draw the line at 1 p.m. and there's still no time for a conspiracy. So when you see the whole march, when Milkshake makes a nefarious comment about going down the stairs, Dominic was not there. Milkshake was. So he gets added to another chat, and that's the earliest date imaginable that they could link him. But there was no conspiracy. There were no agreements. Tario got arrested in this case. Nobody knew what was going on. So on January 6th, there was no plan. That leaves the march. And they get back as soon as the breach. So there's no time for a plan. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a fairy dust. That was quite the pieced together story about Pizzola being part of a conspiracy. They want you to look at how I want you to look at how they cherry picked. They don't want you to focus on the timeline. They don't want you to focus on the nuts and bolts, because when you do, you see there's nothing there. Nothing at all. Pizzola left the march. It's undisputed. It shows him not entering into what they want you to believe he entered into. I also want you to think about what he did inside the building. He wandered around alone, literally sightseeing. He wasn't even meeting up with the other defendants. This whole story is made up. It's to dirty up the other defendants because he broke a window and stole a riot shield. He told you he acted alone. He said, hold me responsible. Judge me by me. And it's baffling when you think about that. Pizzola also told you guys that he believed the purpose of the Proud Boys was self-defense of other Trump supporters. They'd jump out in front and allow supporters to be beaten. Same thing happened on January 6th. And think about his training. Think about his boxing, his military. Military trains you a little bit differently. Trained, don't go back, only go forward. In a military scenario, when he used the word enemy, he wasn't referring to the police. If you turn around, you get shot in the back. In boxing, you can't turn around and go the other way. This was a fight or flight scenario for Dominic. And when that happens, he chooses to fight every time. He's wired a little bit differently. He's trained a little bit differently than us. That's what made him go forward. And so let's go back to the timeline. He came to D.C., linked up with the Proud Boys. He's a first degree. You saw a picture of him. They post some images in different places. They're there. They make a bunch of different stops. He meets some people they find out from the same neighborhood, and they jump into the chats with each other. Now, what happened was Green and Bertino had a substantial amount of guns, a lot of guns. 3,000 rounds of ammo, which means 3,000 reasons to take a plea deal. Those people were biased. Dominic got his hands on a shield, ladies and gentlemen. He broke a window. He went inside a building and he walked around for 23 minutes. After that, he left the building, gave the shield back to the officers, and then went back to the hotel room. That same hotel room he left. 10 minutes later, he was filled with people, but he left. Is that a conspiracy? And destruction of property, there was no plan about that. Dom ran up to the building. By the time he gets to the building, the window pane was already completely smashed. Dom comes, breaks out the left side, breaks the entire side, but the other guy already broke the white pane. And he can't aid and abet that other person. One of those window panes, $774, is absurd. But ladies and gentlemen, if you're going to hit him with that one. They're also saying something about a frozen water bottle, but there's no evidence that there was water or anything frozen in that bottle. There's also no evidence that Dominic had anything to do with that at all. Says this is a desperate attempt and should not even be part of that scenario. Pizzola didn't know Donahoe. They took a picture and went their separate ways. But the funny thing is, I go back to the fairy dust and the fairy tale scenario. Count 9. That was referred to yesterday as tactical success. It's crazy when you think about it. Now think about Officer Bodie being in a bad situation. You heard from Stephen Hill and Pizzola. Pizzola runs past everyone up the stairs. The police set up 2 lines. Odie didn't know who took the shield from him. It was complete chaos. There were people in the crowd who were instigators and aggressors. There was a guy in a blue jacket, a guy in a blue sweatshirt. They were shoving. But does that mean the officers could just start shooting at them? Dominic was in the crowd and he hears shots. Boom, 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 boom. He turns around and he sees Joshua Black shot in the face. Blood everywhere. Then he gets a second shooter begin shooting. Officer Lloyd positioned himself in a certain way, made a circular motion. Hit these people. I don't care where. Hit him. Then you've got guys next to the shooter saying, hit the guy. Hit the guy in the blue. Hit the guy in the gray. Then you have other people not doing anything getting hit. Robbery. You don't need to speculate on robbery. It says intent to permanently deprive of the shield. Pizzola gave the shield back. What's he going to do? Walk the streets with a big shield? Put it in a dining room? No. It wasn't a trophy. He wanted coverage. He admitted that when he touched it, he fell back and people were on top of him. Odie was ashamed to say it, but he left his shield. And when he finally looked for his gun, but left his shield and somebody else grabbed it. And each one of these pictures conveniently leaves out where Dominic is getting up. Was this appropriate? No. But circumstances were there that day. Police started firing down on the crowd, and then they started agitating the crowd. They created chaos on chaos, and all the people in the vicinity were in danger. Look at Joshua Black's face. If you got hit in the temple, you could have probably died. You could have lost an eye. Split seconds. You have a self-defense claim as well. You have jury instructions on that as well. And so the government has the burden to disprove self-defense, not the other way around. We met our burden that self-defense is a potential claim for Pizzola. He's being shot at. Think how much time was spent on self-defense yesterday. Answer was none. They didn't even dispute that. They didn't even dispute my claims at all. So they're going to wait till the end and they get the last word so they can try to disprove self-defense. And also there's a lesser included offense of robbery. They say, what's robbery? Someone with a gun saying, give me your money. Don't think of people from an elevated position shooting at you and taking away a shield. That's not what that was for. He acted in self-defense against an immediate use of unlawful force. Was Pizzola receiving commands from Tario in an ivory tower in Baltimore? Hey, get that shield and go do this. No. They want you to believe that this was orchestrated. But these guys couldn't handle ordering at McDonald's. You remember them saying, oh, it wasn't a flashbang, it was a sting ball. Common sense tells you, you roll those on the floor, you don't throw it in a crowd. Picture me taking a sting ball and just throwing it right over there at you. Yeah, they'd be pretty pissed off, wouldn't they? They'd be scattering. It'd be craziness. That's what we're talking about. So do the right thing for Dominic Pizzola, ladies and gentlemen. If you have a conviction in your mind about your belief, hold on to it. Discuss it with your fellow jurors. There are different scenarios that can be considered with respect to the robbery count. Read this language about seditious conspiracy. And don't fall for this trap. My colleague, Nick Smith, you already heard from, said this case is held together with paper clips and tape. Sad to say this is true. Now, I'm not saying that you should find him not guilty of everything. Go through this, though, count by count. Put your politics aside. Don't speculate. Look at the people here who lied time and time again. And the government didn't care so long as they came in and told you what they wanted. Pizzola is a pawn to muddy up and dirty these other men. I ask that you see through this madness. I'm sorry this took so long, but I ask you to do the right thing. If you doubt something, that doubt is reasonable. And apply it to every count of this conspiracy and every other count here. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And do the right thing. Dominic Pizzola wraps up. Now, the jury is excused for lunch, and we fast forward through it. And Norm Pattis is delivering the defense closing argument for Joe Biggs. He says, ladies and gentlemen, hindsight is perfect. Foresight requires trust, cooperation, faith, hope, and charity. I can't walk into a courtroom and not be overcome by that seal. We the people. That's you. 1776, he says. One of the reasons we broke from England is for this trial by jury. Mr. Hull and Joe Biggs, can you stand up for me, please, Joe? Now, we all have roles in this trial. What's at stake here are principles. Our Constitution is valuable. It created a new order for the ages. He says, we become friends together by living together. We live together under the rule of law. Still searching for the mystery of e pluribus unum, what makes one out of many. Cicero once said that society, a res publica, a public thing, is a people bound together by common interests. And what makes us unique is our founding document. Tocqueville once said, he came in the 1830s, he wrote a book called Democracy in America. He says what makes us unique is at our founding, it had a literate public that put down what they were doing. But what's become of us anyhow? He says everyone talks about silos. You go to one news operation, I go to another. You know, we used to be one people. The world marvels at us. We had a position of global leadership, the American century, and now people wonder, are they watching it unravel? I want to issue you a challenge. Show the world with this verdict that the rule of law is alive and well. Have courage and determination. Apply the rule of law to these uncomfortable facts. I'm confident that if you do, almost every count will be an acquittal. Am I mad? Am I drinking my own Kool-Aid? I don't think so. It's been my pleasure to come down here from Connecticut and to be here with your hospitality, meeting these people, meeting the prosecutors, meeting the defense lawyers, Mr. Roots, the mountain man from Montana, Carmen Hernandez, a tiger. My pleasure to stand next to her, a tiger indeed. But I was surprised when Mulrow gave his case, and he began midstream. I get it. You know, War and Peace is a long novel, but you got to read the first couple of chapters to understand the book. Now, it's convenient if you want to tell only half the story, but I want to tell it all. In 2016, we elected Donald Trump. How surprising was that, right? Country went to pieces. We had warring camps. He ran again in 2020 and lost. And when he ran again, after we'd spent significant amount of time in the pandemic, we had shelter in place, historians will tell you every pandemic brings out social dislocation. It happened during the Peloponnesian War, racial protest and violence, as it always happens. Look back at our history, labor unrest, bombings, during the Weather Underground days. Some people took advantage of those divisions. Jeremy Bertino did in this case. He tried to bait Antifa into fights. Does Antifa exist? I think it does. And so enter the Proud Boys. Formed by Gavin McGinnis, Proud of Your Boy comes from the movie Aladdin. You got to name 5 cereals while getting beaten. You need to get a tattoo. There's a dispute about what you need to do to get the 4th degree, but the Proud Boys exist and they fill a need. Remember Tocqueville. History matters. We are our history. If you think ideas don't matter, look around again. In this courtroom, justice, due process, First Amendment. We apply them in highly ritualized combat of this trial. Objection sustained. Prosecutors. Here come the Proud Boys. Trump is president. Many appear to support him. Proud Boys are either a political club with a drinking problem or a drinking club with a political problem, or both. They're about camaraderie. The internet separates us today. We've got silos. We don't hold doors open for each other anymore. Speak for yourself there, buddy. We don't know each other anymore. Now showing a stipulation that Joe Biggs put in. Joe says, I'm not testifying, and he has the right to remain silent. He enlisted in the Army in 2004. You can read all about this. He became part of the 82nd Airborne. He deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. He was there, and during the service of our country, he was injured. He was awarded a Purple Heart, a hero. He was honorably discharged, and he receives disability payment for his service. 5-year-old daughter, loves his family, loves his country, and yes, the boys. We depend on one another. We're a community of strangers, and we come to know each other through the rule of law. And so they saw groups attacking Trump supporters. They ID'd them as Antifa. They believed in the First Amendment, and they joined. In 2020, the pandemic, Joe Biden ran against, and in the debate, what happened? Watch the whole thing. Donald Trump didn't come shooting out of the block saying Proud Boys. Wallace baited him into adopting the Proud Boys as his own. The test was, are you going to denounce the white supremacist? But who said the Proud Boys are the white supremacists? The mainstream media did. Go back and look at it. Obviously, they can't look at the press. After the debate, the Proud Boys went into a new phase. Some members were angry. They tried to vet individuals. They protested in places like Portland and elsewhere. Then came the election. Lots of counting, lots of absentee ballots. President was advancing a narrative. Sidney Powell, all sorts of other people were involved in this. You remember it. The leader of the free world said a thing and the Proud Boys believed it. Bertino was a true believer. He says Biden's a Chinese puppet. And there was also Jeremy. He was buying this too, buying the conspiracy theories. Now, I'm not going to attack Mr. Kinnearson for lying, Mrs. Moore or Mr. Mulrow or Mr. McCullough for lying. Wow. A conspiracy theory is a narrative that seeks to reduce the complexity of life to good and evil, and the good guy wins. That's what Bertino was. Says a crazy notion, almost as crazy that January 6th was planned by these 5 conspirators. Donald Trump said a bunch of stuff, and people come here for a reason to Washington. You're not a state. D.C. is marked off as a separate territory. You guys didn't want to be a captive of any state. And we don't want a government of unlimited power. We encourage people to come here and petition for a redress of grievances. You've got a God-given right to come to this city and complain about the right to have your voices heard. Think of the charges in this case. Bunch of people, thousands of them, go to the Capitol. The government stands here and says concerted action equals agreement. On that theory, every person in these videos was a co-conspirator. If I go to a ball game and you buy a hot dog, am I responsible for that? Now, we're in the fall of 2020. There's a march in November. December, there's another march. They're squabbling. You saw some of it's ugly, some videos of people being knocked out. But she had a knife. They glorified that. F around, find out. Was it Bertino or Green who had it tattooed on his fingers? I don't remember. December was another rally. There was a stabbing at that one. They're talking about Chinese communists here. You need to repair this, ladies and gentlemen. Something fundamental is being ripped away. If not for your sake, for the sake of your grandchildren. Trump is not on trial here, much as I wish he were. Woo! For several counts, you need corrupt purpose and consciousness of wrongdoing. If my president says something, do I believe the president? That's what they did. But they came to look at the Telegram chat, and there was a lot of trash talk. But the Constitution protects free speech. We have the First Amendment in this country. And you can say things as long as it does not pose an imminent risk of violence, and it's not likely to produce the violence. Each and every one of the chats is protected. Attend, gonna be there, gonna be wild. All of that's protected. Enrique was set to speak at an event. He was arrested. Some other genius said, let's meet at the Washington Monument, so they did. But what would the evidence of a conspiracy be? Where's the secret text? There isn't any. There's none. No plan. No objective. When the day started, the president was going through talking about what Pence might do. And look at Nordine. Study the Proud Boys as they march. What you will not see. Waving flags. At a perimeter now, and then you see a flag, a Gadsden flag. None of them are carrying the Appeal to Heaven flag. They're not carrying any We Love Trump flags. They're not even carrying any American flags. They went to the food trucks. There was nothing to see there. Joe Biggs is saying on the microphone, F Antifa, F Antifa. Whose streets are streets? Joe says, whose capital are capital? And when you study these videos, you're going to see that there are men in dark clothes, another man named Paul Russell Johnson, with a megaphone. Mr. Biggs went, I don't know whether to spend time on his comments, but he said this is war. What happened at the first breach? He says Matt Green was a vet. He had served in Afghanistan. He described the food riot. He described herd mentality. Confidential human source, Aaron told you the same thing. Something snapped and they surged forward. That's it. Breach 1, 2, 3, and 4. Any signs of vandalism in the building? Probably less than the one they burned in Walmart in Chicago. No evidence of a conspiracy. At some moment, the crowd snapped. Did these guys celebrate? Yeah. Their rubber band army snapped back and they started talking trash again. Then a new conspiracy started. Good versus evil. These men tried to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power. They said whatever happens, make it a spectacle. And they did. All with the effort to make a complicated situation simple. They were inspired by a leader who was president, who's seeking office again. That's all. There was no agreement. There was no mutual understanding. There was no meeting of the minds. If you listen to Biggs, does he sound like a dangerous man? Or does he sound like an uncle at Thanksgiving who's had too many servings of potatoes? Don't fall for this. You heard a lot about challenge coins. One of them saying, I'm a Western chauvinist who refuses to apologize for creating the Western world. So what? Aren't we all? People flock to this country because we offer unheralded opportunities for all. We're sitting in a temple of Western chauvinism in this courtroom. No one else does this. And for this, they're criminals. So I'm proud of my boys. I simply am, and you should be too. We heard the Zoom tape. You heard off-color comments about women and Jews and blacks. So what? They believe in the First Amendment. They're not being charged with that. You are not St. Peter at the pearly gates deciding whether someone has led a righteous life. When you walk into a criminal courtroom, what's your natural instinct? I wonder what these guys did. But what should happen? What do they think these guys did? And can they prove it? When you go in and you look at your jury instructions, you'll see on page 3, the presumption of evidence, or maybe innocence. We begin here because the government has power and they can take your liberty away. And they must be held to the burden of proof, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. If you have any doubts, that's enough. Nothing is more important than the decision you're going to make here. This case is the United States of America versus Nordine. Well, what is the United States of America? It's an institution of law. You should look at the case and say, what have they charged here? And you should ask, why didn't they charge other things? A man named Harvey Silverglade once wrote a book called 3 Felonies a Day. You may not know it, but you commit 3 felonies a day. Objection. When you look at the charges here, there should be mere knowledge. You should consider that mere knowledge and acquiescence in conduct is not enough. This should be an easy decision for you. There was no conspiracy to suggest in the twinkling of an eye, between a heartbeat, between Biggs saying, whose house, our house, and the barricade falling, that that's enough time to form a conspiracy would be dangerous. If the president of the United States is telling people something, people will do things. The arc of justice bends toward justice. He says, I know the government's going to come back and hit us with a rebuttal. They have a number of different theories of liability. But don't expect more of the government than just playing whack-a-mole. Have the courage of your convictions. They're throwing everything here. But is there any evidence that Biggs threw a water bottle or broke a window or broke a fence? Does it look like he's trying to break it or keep his balance? We think that an acquittal here is the right result. The government brought this case. The judge will tell you you must apply the law. And your verdict means so much more than January 6th itself. January 6th was an aberration. Your verdict will speak to the future. Can you stand up, Joe? Joe stands up. I want to thank you for the privilege and honor of representing you. Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever been to a park and seen old men playing chess? He tells some story about a bird on a basketball court. Is it alive or dead? You decide. Don't understand it. Pattis is done, and then the jury takes a break. Now, the prosecutor complains and says, I want a curative instruction. Judge says he'll give a curative instruction. Pattis wanted to argue about jury nullification, but they said no. Gives the jury instruction. And the jury comes back in. So he tells the judge. The judge tells the jury. You heard a couple things there, and I just want to clarify that you may only consider only the evidence properly admitted by law. If somebody suggests you should send a message by issuing this verdict, disregard that argument to send a message. Only weigh the facts of the case. Don't nullify this trial. Prosecutor Nadia Moore stands up for her rebuttal. And the reason the government gets two closing arguments, theoretically, is because they have a high burden of proof, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's supposed to be like a real difficult thing for them to get over that burden, even though it doesn't work that way at all. The presumption of innocence is just a nice theory in many cases. Anytime somebody's charged, everybody thinks that they're already guilty, including the jurors, including the judge, including the prosecutors, and everybody involved. So they actually get two arguments because, they want to make sure they get convictions, in my humble opinion. It's not fair at all. But as it goes forward, she gets to go again. Says, ladies and gentlemen, the defense here doesn't have any burden. They're right. The burden does rest with us. And we embrace that. But that doesn't mean you should take the defense's speculation and innuendo. The witnesses we put on the stand were cooperating. They play a bunch of videos. Tario said, make no mistake, we did this. And that's devastating. And the defense wants you to be distracted. They want you to point to a specific plan, but don't. Keep your eye on the ball. Message after message. And if you travel across the country to force your way into the Capitol, that's enough. You saw evidence of deleted chats. You saw messages that they're going to do whatever they can to stop this. Tario complained about a few small errors. But they didn't contest what they said in the messages. And he said, remember, make no mistake, we did this. They play some other clips. And she says they traveled to D.C. and they tracked Trump's legal challenges, hoping the results would be overturned. They said that they would go nuts. They said that this was a battle between good and evil. Fact check true. Focused on J6, the last opportunity they stormed the Capitol. The purpose was to illegally keep Trump in power, they say, and to do it corruptly. Then layer upon layer of the barricade. Did they stop? No. They went through every barricade, and they said, this is awesome. We have a couple of objections, and they're playing more. Hernandez objects, misstates the law. Pizzola celebrated too, and she says, that's all you need. Case closed. Now, Mr. Smith wants you to think that it would be unreasonable for Nordine to speak up and rebuke those members. Hernandez objects. But conspiracy is a much lower standard than what they would have you believe. It can be unspoken and it can be implicit. You don't even have to openly communicate about an explicit plan. Unspoken and implied is all you need. They acted together in violence without being told the same thing in December. And the Proud Boys were all angry. They were all working towards the same government, the same outcome. There's no requirement that we prove a formal, detailed plan. You saw everything you needed on their Parler and Telegram. And they all came to the Capitol except Tarrio, and he couldn't because of a court order. Who else was there? Hernandez says, Your Honor, can we be heard on this? Sidebar is still going. And more comes back. She says, after surging into the Capitol, Pizzola took the shield. Another objection and another sidebar that is sustained. Says that Zachary Rehl went in there and he was smoking in an office. And there was pepper spray and Biggs was riling people up on the phone. And Pizzola ripped a shield from an officer. And Donahoe threw water bottles. And Milkshake bum rushed the officers. And George Meza said that the rioters were heroes. And she's recapping everything. They say that if they had been plotting, the confidential human sources would have told the handlers. But the fact is that the CHSs didn't report is because they were Proud Boys first and foremost. Oh, yeah, that's why the FBI didn't get any wind of this. Because the FBI informants were more loyal to the Proud Boys than they were to their feds, their Fed handlers. Even though they've already betrayed the Proud Boys, essentially, by becoming FBI handlers. So they show you where their loyalties will lie. Aaron claimed he only went in to protect antiquities, but you saw him move the podium. Aaron was not a CHS who happened to be a Proud Boy. He was a Proud Boy who happened to be a CHS. Give me a break. To listen to the defense, you'd think that USA versus Bertino. It's not. We didn't pick Bertino. The defendants did. They made him a leader. Bertino pleaded guilty to seditious conspiracy. And they say only he did that because of the threats of the gun charges. But who would get out from under a gun charge by pleading guilty to a more serious offense? It makes no sense. Objection. They say the Proud Boys agreed to do whatever was necessary to save the country. All they talked about. And January 6th was the last chance to do it. More messages. More objections. They use the term Winter Palace in connection with this. More objections. More objections. Burden shifting. Objections overruled. Objection. Objection. Wow. So why did Zachary Rehl write his mom that he was so proud? Because he'd stopped the certification. Objection overruled. You saw what the self-defense meant to Proud Boys. Objection. Sidebar. Objection overruled. Gosh, knocking out a woman who was retreating, beating and stomping a man. This is self-defense, she says. So yeah, they created the chat. They might have wanted a more organized rally, but not a less violent one. And now I want to talk about Lieutenant Shane Lamont. Tarrio had Lamont wrapped around his little finger, a cop. Both knew their comms were inappropriate. They set their messages to self-destruct. Tarrio told Lamont that the Proud Boys would be very small, but it wasn't. And after Tarrio's arrest, they tried to nuke their chats. Carmen Hernandez wanted you to believe that Zachary Real wasn't violent. We've seen his messages. He celebrated after the fact. And when Real was stopped at a black metal fence, he continued screaming. You saw him spray police on the West office. He was asked over and over, and he lied to you over and over. You saw what he was wearing. You saw the video. You know what he did. Pizzola said he wasn't involved in the planning, but he doesn't have to have a leadership goal. He joined January 6th by agreement, and the duration of the agreement has no bearing on his guilt. You can join an unspoken agreement at any time, including during the riot. He was among the first to storm the grounds. He engaged in violence, attacked and ripped away a shield, and threatened officers under the scaffolding. Those aren't words of a man in fear. Those are words of a man on the march. Inside the video, inside the Capitol, he took videos of himself. And even though Pizzola wasn't a leader, Tarrio knew exactly who he was and said he was the real man that they wanted for the chat. The Proud Boys were always angry at the police, calling them Cop Tifa, another objection. Nordine wants you to make a decision on his intent based on two moments. Putting his hand up and stopping, another objections. But then after Nordine ripped down the fence, he went upstairs to the Capitol, took advantage of the overwhelming numbers. There were blaring alarms, and as police tried to push him out, he stared them down and called them all effing jokes. And then he said the thin blue line is dead. Smith was asking about Officer Cooney and what Nordine was doing on the West Front. And she said Nordine interfered with her. And Tarrio wasn't just a figurehead. He was actively involved in the planning. He agreed with these men and he helped them commit crimes. He created the chat. He made clear the purpose was for 1776. And while the riot was going on, he reaches out to Biggs and Nordine as top lieutenants and publicly celebrated, saying, don't effing leave. Make no mistake, we did this. Real and Nordine, they say, you also heard from Linnell that Pence had to be evacuated. But it doesn't sound like this is a man who wanted the legal proceedings to proceed. Pizzola wants you to believe that when he grabbed Odie's shield and pulled him to the ground that he was the real victim or that he acted in self-defense. But he has no information about any of this stuff. He doesn't know anything about flashbangs. He doesn't know anything about Ray Epps. And he was just lying to you to get a benefit. He's in a jam. He hopes you believe his stories. Like he's the victim. But he's clearly the aggressor here. And he wants you to believe that he contributed nothing to the destruction of the window. But he was there. He said he liked the best seat in the house, and he got it. He was breaching the first barrier. Pizzola grabbed the shield, pulled him into a crowd. Did he use it to pose for cover? No. He used it to pose for pictures. And he only gave the shield back when they demanded it. And so the rule of law means that you don't always get your way. Comparing themselves to the founding fathers doesn't legitimize their actions. Their actions almost destroyed the Constitution. Those are crimes. And the crimes these defendants committed, find them guilty on all counts. And she finishes. Now, the judge says, ladies and gentlemen, before I excuse you to deliberate, which will start tomorrow, a few additional instructions here. You may consider statements to show a speaker had a certain motive. First Amendment protects speech. And now, avoid the media in the case. Don't do any independent investigation. Giving them jury instructions, which we'll fast forward through. And now tomorrow, we may need to summon you back. After the verdict, you can discuss the case. And he released the two jurors. Seats 11, 15 are the alternates. You're excused. And the jurors are excused. The attorneys stay. The judge says, okay, well, here's the plan. They're going to deliberate from 9 to 5 each day. I'll ask counsel to be on call. Be able to get here in 15 minutes if we get a note. I do plan to bring them in every day at 5 p.m. to re-instruct them about publicity and research. And says, you don't intend to bring them in at 9? No. You may have argument about issues during the argument, so tomorrow I'll hear you, so that may be an exception. Smith says, if you'll hear us on arguments for a mistrial and curative, he says, well, I'll just file it by mail. Jurors will be going to lunch for an hour at lunch. Are they going to be deliberating on Friday? He says yes. There is a juror conflict, though. And we are adjourned. Woo, woo. So that is a major end of a major trial. The case is now closed. Roger Parloff says, I'm not coming in for deliberations, but it's been an honor and a pleasure. And make sure you're giving Roger a follow and Lawfare blog a follow for the amazing reporting throughout this trial. But that, my friends, is it for the Proud Boy trial. Now, of course, we're still waiting for a verdict. We still need a verdict, and we'll see if it is not a full acquittal. There'll be sentencings, and there'll be more to get into. But we made it through 62 days of trial. And of course, we didn't start at the very beginning. We jumped in after the government presented their garbage case in chief, and we started to see some fireworks from the defense. But we are done here, and we'll continue to come back and see what the verdict has in store. Thank you to Roger Parloff. Thank you to Brandy Buckman. Thank you to all the reporters out there doing the great reporting on the inside so that we could cover it here. We'll, of course, await the verdict. But now let's see what you have to say about all of this and more from our friends over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com and our friends on YouTube, because there is some comments to attend to. And I saw a couple of them come in the house on YouTube. We'll see what's going on over on Rumble and on Twitter as well. Hey, Voice of the People is here today. Says, this case sounds like a Kavanaugh situation. Another BS case. I'm going to have fun with this when it's over. Yeah, Voice of the People in the house. It is a total BS case. You're talking about the Trump lawsuit, which is the first segment of the day. Voice also says, and thanks for the double today, Voice, says, stay covering the Trump case. So many allegations go unnoticed. The accusation is always remembered and no one follows through the conclusion. Put it on record. All right. Yeah, I mean, if I want to cover stuff that you guys are obviously interested in. And yeah, Jackie says, thanks, Rob. Please continue to cover the Trump case. Thank you for following through with the Proud Boys case. Much love for you. Thank you, Jackie. All right. Yeah, I mean, if there's interest, we'll keep on it. I don't even know what it's going to look like. It's such a bizarre case. But we saw some openings, and we'll have some more evidence presented tomorrow. Eddie Block is here, and if you're not already following Eddie Block has a real good boy named Donnie, and of course he testified in the Proud Boys trial. Says, I'll have a Twitter Spaces on my stream tonight, maybe even a call-in from Enrique. Maybe. Woo! All right, so that is... How are you going to get a call in from Enrique? Maybe, it says Eddie Block. So make sure you're subscribed over to Eddie Block, because he's going to have a Twitter Spaces, and he testified in this trial, and he was there. So maybe even get a call from Enrique. I don't know how that's going to happen, but that's pretty amazing. So shout out to Eddie Block, and thank you for sending in the super chat, my friend, and I'll keep an eye out on your work and what you're doing over there. And we had a couple other comments. Oh, hey, sweet. Fred is here. He says, it's so bad, I believe it's time for a new flood, says Fred Pedamonte over on the YouTube chat. Well, maybe there is one coming. You know, there is a lot of flooding around the world right now. Hopefully we can just fix it. I'd rather not obliterate the planet again. From Fred, good to see you, Fred. Hopefully Johnny's doing good. Ray K says, did Pattis make his closing too complicated? It's a good question. It was a little... heavy on the American history, I would say. Going into Alexis de Tocqueville and all that stuff is a little deep. That's his style, though. And, I don't disagree with it. I like what he says, but I don't know if the jury, if it's going to land with the jury or not. They may just glaze over and just say, what? Anyways, great stuff from our friends on YouTube. Thank you, Ray K, for sending that one in as well. Let's see who's over on Rumble. We got our friends Slightly Salty's over there. Good to see you, Slightly Salty. We have Dispatch, who's in the house. Gibbs and Beans' mom is here. DGW. We got a bunch of new names over here in the Rumble chats. Awesome. We got Indoctrinations in the house. White Wolf. Ass O is over there. Nick Danger the Third. It's good to see everybody on the Rumble chat. And we'll also check in with our friends on Twitter and say hello to the Twitter thread before we wrap it up and go over to our after party for our members only after party. So let's see who is on the chat here. Over on Twitter, Paul Minot says you should start covering combat sports and men's fashion. I dare you. You know, there is a good UFC litigation going on, actually. I forget his name. Somebody, yeah, there is some good UFC litigation. But I decline your dare, Paul. Thanks for the dare, though. Vientikis says, we've seen the change in strategies by lawyers engaging in more public relations. I wonder how long before the fallacy of the closed system completely collapses in the courts, forcing a change. It's a great question, V. It's a great question. I mean, I don't know. It feels like it's totally fake now. You know, how can you get a fair and impartial ruling with a Donald Trump defendant? Crazy. Good comment. Danny says, they say that deplatforming Tucker is a good thing. What happens when you open the gate of a mad bull? I actually do think it's a good thing. I'm not mourning Tucker Carlson. I'm like kind of excited for him. I'm excited to see what he does. Truthfully, it's like, cool. This is great. I think it's great news, actually. We also had Jay Adams says, Robert, continue with the Trump case. Would also like to hear on George McGonnell from the FBI. And Andrew says, how many cans, I don't know, how many cans, he's asking why my brain is so deformed. How many cans of spray paint did you huff as a kid? Me, asking me. Hundreds? Thousands? I don't know. So many, I don't even remember ever doing it, apparently. I don't remember doing huffing any of them. So that must mean it's like a ton of them or something. Anyways, nice question. That came in from Rumble and from Twitter. And of course, I think we also had a very generous dono from our friend Dolphin Fan, if I'm not mistaken, that was a member gift. Invited some members over to our amazing community. No, that was from Zulu. Hey, Zulu did it. Zulu gifted 5 members. 5 members. Amazing. Thank you, Zulu, for doing that. Gifted 5 membos. John McGarvey says, please spare us the 8 hours of jury instructions. We'll skip the jury instructions. Yeah. Okay, cool. And hey, thank you, V, for clipping some of those and sending them in my way. All right. And so Voice of the People also says, imagine how this would be sounding like an audiobook for Watching the Watchers paywall by the followers. How this would be sounding like an audiobook for Watching the Watchers paywall by the followers. I don't know that I'm following that, Voice. Are you saying I should write an audiobook or record an audiobook? There was a joke that I should do affirming affirmations. Affirming morning affirmations by Rob. Wouldn't that just be the worst? It would be kind of hilarious. All right. And so that, my friends, is it for us on the day. Boy, we covered some good ground today. We got one trial wrapping up, the Proud Boys trial, and then we have a whole new trial starting. Donald Trump will very likely be in the middle of a ton of litigation moving forward. But the current trial, Southern District of New York, we have a jury that has been impaneled and selected, and the trial starts in full tomorrow. And so that is it for us on the day, my friends. We are going over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com and our Telegram for our after party. So if you're a member on YouTube, get the Telegram link in the community post section and join us over there. And Locals will be right back there with you in a second as well. Before we wrap it up, don't forget to get your Field of Greens, your real organic superfood, courtesy of our friends at fieldofgreens.com. It's a great way to eat your daily servings of fruits and vegetables and to stay healthy. And the vegetables, they want to be eaten, all right? They just do. You're going to be bursting with green energy. Look at this, just bursting all over the place. The good kind of green energy, and it's very good. Fieldofgreens.com, promo code Robert. Also, if you want the mind map, if you like this software that we use here on the show, you can get a free account, spotlightlawyer.com/mindmap. I use it for all sorts of projects, obviously for the show, organize personal development stuff, set goals. I like how you can just move stuff around. It's very organic. And so check it out, spotlightlawyer.com mindmap. Big ultra mega shout outs to our mods and meme smiths, Vientikis Prime, K Bean, Just Cause in the house, Playing Hooky, Ronnie Cole, our friend Zulu, Geomancy, Zach Nichols. We got John Allen in the house, along with Janek, Dog Digger, and Donut Mind Me, along with our friend Sleepy Dogley and Geegum, who all help to make the show possible and keep the train on the tracks, and we appreciate that. But that, my friends, is it for us on the day. We are going over to our after party. I'd love to see you there, but if not, we'll be back here tomorrow to do it all again. Same time, same place. Thanks for bringing a friend, inviting them over to come and join us as we continue to make our way through the headlines and the stories of the day. I hope you have yourselves a beautiful evening. You sleep very well, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. Have a beautiful evening, my friends. Sleep very well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.